Though teachers have worked tirelessly to teach students from home this year, research shows the learning gap is continuing to widen because of remote education. Experts warn it has not only stunted students' core learning, but potentially their social and emotional learning for years to come. Margaret Raymond joins me now. She's the director of the Center for Research on Education Outcomes at Stanford University. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning. The Center for Research on Education Outcomes did a report on estimated learning loss in the 2019 to 2020 school year. What's the summary of those findings, and could it take years for recovery?
So we looked at what happened to students in 20 states during the 1920 school year. And what we saw was that the typical student lost more than half a year of learning and reading and over a full year of learning in math. Now, those numbers are shocking and of great concern, but even bigger concern is that there's wide variation around those averages, and particular schools that are challenged, that have high needs populations, those learning losses are even bigger. And that, of course, means the loss of learning time will translate into much slower learning over the next few years and a longer period to recovery for all students.
That's not what parents want to hear. We're also finding the biggest differences in communities where students may have a disadvantage, maybe because of funding or maybe because parents, caregivers, are essential workers. They can't teach the little ones. Can you explain more about why this is, and can you help us walk through if communities of color are being more affected from what you're seeing?
Yes, well, that's an obvious place of concern for all educators and policymakers in the United States. We found that communities that served large proportions of minority students or low-income students were the ones that were hardest hit. This isn't particular news. We've known since before the pandemic that there were education inequities, but the pandemic has really raised these inequalities to a new level. And the larger learning losses are in fact being seen in the communities where the students were already struggling the most.
Along with the learning gap, remote learning and being out of school affects children's social and emotional learning. I've been talking to my friends a lot about this, and kids they're dying for the connection. What could the continuation of distance learning mean for kids when it comes to growing in terms of their social life?
So school always has provided a very important component to youth development. And the loss of the structure of classroom time and time with peers and teachers is in fact an important loss for kids. The opportunities exist in communities to try to find other ways to provide those for kids, but those are mostly grassroots efforts, and they are, where successful, they're great, but there are lots of communities where that just isn't happening. And so students are in fact suffering in two dimensions, not only academically, but in the socio-emotional areas as well.
I know, you have to think we as adults are having a hard enough time staying away from each other. I can't imagine telling kids, you know, you can't get together, you can't play, you can't learn together. Being online all day poses a new challenge. We're always hearing of instances of cyberbullying. How is remote learning affecting mental health that you're seeing? Can you expand maybe more on how remote learning is affecting a student's mental health and their well-being that way?
So that's not something that our research directly addresses, but there have been other studies that have done a look at what's happening with kids. We know that mental health challenges have been exacerbated by the change in schooling location. And we also know that communities that are stretched with resources are the places where those problems are the most apparent. So we have, again, a double whammy or a paradox where the greatest needs are occurring in the places where there's the greatest need for help.
You know, as we head into the second half of the school year, teachers are trying their best. I have friends who are teachers who they've struggled so much, and they're doing everything they can. Some of them, if they're little kids, are pulling out costumes and going out of their way to make it fun. But what do districts need to do differently or focus on for better learning for everybody for 2021?
So I'm delighted to have you pose that question, because that's one that education researchers and policymakers are wrestling with every single day. This opportunity that we face is a chance to really rethink how to make school an engaging, joyful, productive place. And you'll see in places like Cleveland and in Seattle and in places like Denver that school districts are struggling to find ways to engage both teachers and students in a new design where students are met where their academic and socio-emotional needs are located, and supports are available for teachers and students so that everyone can move forward.
Margaret, thank you for this very thoughtful conversation. Here's to a better 2021 in the classroom.
Same to you. Thank you so much for having me.